English translation from the original German text by Patrick McKnight and may contain errors. 25 March 2019. Copyright 2019 Creational Truth.
From FIGU Bulletin No. 104, March 2019, pages 13 to 26, German.
How acts it now since the 194th contact of the 15th of June 1984?
Even if we must sever our official contacts, as it was indeed designated, thus we will moreover live on the earth and hold contact with you. However, we remain otherwise only in a more observing and not in active and decisive form, at the very least up to the year 2029, after which we will then presumably finally take off and turn ourselves to other in-earth foreign tasks, with the assurance that we will finally bow out into our time dimension and never more return into this space-time configuration.
Question by Jmmanuels of Germany.
Thereto the following is to be said. It probably will follow in the year 2029 an ample withdrawal of us all Plejaren, after which only sporadically will the events on the earth be observed, due to the earth humankind's lack of interest in the truth of all things, the right mode of life and life conduct concerning love, peace, freedom and fairness, of intellect plus rationality plus logic, hence also the treating with contempt in regard to the study, recognition and following of the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, conditioned through the tremendous religious sectarianism, the belief connectedness to the therein integrated wrong-handed down knowledge as well as lies and calumnies. It unfortunately came in all imaginable directions despite no big striving to amply succeed what was strived for by the level Arahat Atharsata, and this thereby comes about because through various human beings of the earth, who in honest wise are supposed to be responsible for the mission, have themselves resulted in deceit, falsehood, personal failure, hegemonic behaviour, boastfulness, dishonesty, selfishness, egoism, egocentrism, dogmatism, egoism and excessive arrogance and betrayal of the mission, etc., whereby the extensively difficult mission work could not be accomplished in the framework, such as that required formerly. Thereby too much went wrong. Hence through the level Arahatatharsata, transformations in the current mission measures were tackled and issued overall determinations, which we at the time still did not yet extensively know of, and we thus also did not yet know what effectively is connected. Firmly stands hitherto only that we Plejaren withdraw ourselves from the earth, and we no furthermore endeavour around the majority Ausartungen, ones who get badly out of the control of the good human nature of the earth's humankind. Unfortunately, all the very big strivings, as also the very big financial expenditures, efforts and laboriousnesses, the craftsman/technical efforts for many years, and as you have even said, from the grind, drudgery, strains, the stress and the entire tremendously manifold effort does not have an upsetting effect, indeed however to such an extent lacks very big successes, and indeed worldwide, which nevertheless for many earth human beings very much benefit was therefrom gained. Because it on the one hand the way in a right, healthy and valueful life conduct and into a pleasing being a human being in the real and true sense, as also a reconciliation with oneself, the life, with their families, the fellow human beings and find the entire life circumstances. On the other hand through the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, and all your spiritual teaching conditioned works the worldwide also has a stately number of psychological ones and depressive insane who found the way back into a healthy thought-feeling psyche behaviour and also prevented many suicides. The majority of the earth's humankind, however, is unfortunately to such an extent imprisoned in the religious, delusional belief in sectarianism, which they abysmally are struck by anxiety, as however also by malice, selfishness and guilt, and dares not in slightest wise also to only have a breath of a thought which would be directed against the belief delusion, because an enslaved religious falling prey to delusional belief it becomes believed that already also a smallest and not even recognizable most minute nuance of a breath would already precipitate a severe divine punishment concerning belief-free thoughts, which however corresponds to an absolute nonsense.
Questions from a Jmmanuels, Germany.
In Contact Conversations it cites that the successor personalities of Billy of his or her followers' future will be his or hers, also the followers will be recognized among each other. Is the assumption correct? that the successor personalities from Billy to the end his mission on the earth will be fully conscious of his or her mission, with the between incarnations of the 7 true prophets obviously thus it was indeed. Those were not conscious of their prophetic spirit form.
First of all, the successor personalities will no longer practice further mission work in accordance with proclaimerhood, because it was, and is, from the beginning designated only a series of 7 proclaimers. Hence future reincarnations of the spirit form will no longer show, and therewith also incarnations of new personalities absolutely no more further of mission nature. The successor personalities of future followers of the mission, and Billy, also will thus not be recognized, although even repeatedly new personalities will step into appearance, which however will not necessarily be on the earth, each accordingly, whether he remains here or goes on to the Plejaren planet era.
To the topic, No for Humaneness.
My comment. There always are those pre-given who argue for God, the most unpeaceful human beings on earth, because they believe to hear celestial embassy, heavenly messages. There is a death for every word of the humaneness. From Stefan Branches, Maria Stewart, Dieter Hape, Mannheim.
Is it well known what name the wife of Jmmanuel carried and how many children did he have with her?
See the 207th contact on the 17th of March 1986. It goes around Jmmanuel.
Indeed, he lived, at that time, like what falsifications created, already in India, where he also married and with his wife procreated several children.
The wife of Jmmanuel carried the name Ranyana, Girl of Light. From out of this marriage arose 2 sons and 2 daughters.
To 150. Contact from the 10th of October 1981.
As indeed is known, there are 7 Antilogos, which become for the threatening global conflagration guilty distinguish, and Ronald Reagan is in fact one of them.
Which 6 further persons outside Ronald Reagan have to be counted in the 7 Antilogos? There too belongs maybe the 2 Bush presidents of the USA as well as Saddam Hussein, the terrorist Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and maybe the North Korean ruling power Kim Jong-un? Can the correct names of all Antilogos be cited, and who are they?
Unfortunately, these persons may not be cited, because with the mention of names serious results arise, and therefrom catastrophes would be brought about.
In the 117th contact from the 29th of November 1978.
Here the speech was about it, that both Quetzal as also Billy are in mysterious wise in the position to completely regenerate their powers within a short time, which until then was unexplainable by the Plejaren.
Was it in the meantime clarified and found out how Billy and Quetzal are thereto in the position? Is it maybe thus that the 2 can retrieve new powers directly from the spirit realm?
Both renew their energies and powers through the activity of their work, which they fulfill with joy, whereby from out of this constantly new energy arises to them and precisely creates new energies and powers. Consequently, thus can be said new energy and powers through the joy of work.
I translated the article about anti-Semitism, racism, etc. from the block 15, and these 2 following sentences appear to contradict each other.
Misanthropy characterizes thus an attitude and a consciousness attitude, however not a mode of action. Thus a misanthrope must neither be aggressive with acts of gewalt, nor be arrogant. Contrarily, such a human being can really be altruistically predisposed and thus devoted, self-sacrificing, selfless, unselfish, noble-minded, magnanimous and of noble concern, even when seemingly as paradoxically contrary to his or her misanthropicness stands. Generally the mode of action is to be thus known as attitude and view of human beings, whereby however, with extreme cases of disgust towards the human beings, the misanthropy predisposed one isolates him/herself and leads a hermit's existence.
I do not comprehend how misanthropy is characterized as an attitude and a consciousness attitude and not a mode of action, and in next the sentence stands, that mode of action is generally to be known as attitude and view of human beings. Many dear thanks for the assistance.
Asked by Vidkawalder of Australia.
I could not answer your question, therefore I have turned myself to Billy and was taught by him, which is also very instructive for me, as I could recognize. Initially Billy said that it acts itself around no contradiction with the two sentences. Now I attempt to explain to you connections more logically understandable. Best I begin with an example from Billy that has helped me to understand the things. Negative and positive belong together as a oneness, in addition, are to be separated ones. That means, everything is for itself completed, is effectively separated, however both wield mutual influence. With these inner positive and negative energies the human being forms his or her inner world. Decisively for him/her, which energies the human being draws into him/herself, positive or negative, is always exclusively his or her mode of thinking, because therewith he/she forms his or her attitude and consciousness attitude. Fundamentally it is therefore thus, that no human being is only good or only evil in him/herself, but rather he/she is very multi-layered and also is often contrary in his or her penchants. Applied to your question, that means that a misanthrope must not automatically only concern misanthropic with all negative accompaniments, but rather there is the counterpart to the misanthropy, namely the altruisms with it also takes effect, each however precisely, depending whether he/she has a penchant regarding this. As said, no human being has only one side, so therefore a misanthrope can also definitely have different, contrary and positive sides, which he/she works out under certain circumstances. How I have comprehended Billy, the mode of action of a human being is indeed generally dependent on his or her attitude and view, however not coercingly pre-given like precisely in regard to the misanthropy of human beings. This for this reason, since contrary penchants can wield an influence on the behavior and affairs, depending upon the always provided mode of thinking. Similar one also reacts with psychopathic predisposed human beings, whose deeds indeed also must not be coercingly pitiless, manipulating, calculating or with acts of guile, etc., but rather can lead to some definitely normal, righteous lives with good interhuman relationships. Also regarding this contrary penchants can take effect under certain circumstances. Dearest greetings, also in the name of Billy, Salome.
Answered by Elizabeth Grubber of Austria.
We were interested what the real reason for it is, why the Plejaren take on absolutely no contacts with the terrestrial governments or otherwise with any people on the earth. It is indeed always much talked about it, however really just a little is the matter explained, as also not that, how and why it thereto came, that the Plejaren found peace more than 52,000 years ago.
Asked by F. Horstler and Nachschluter of Germany.
These questions are over and over again presented to me, which is why it was a necessity to me, regarding this, to enter into a conversation about it with Pata, and for once to openly enlighten according to possibility the obligations and expectations. This possibility has itself been given on the 8th of October 2018 with the 711th official contact conversation. Consequently I repeat the main part of the therewith discussions as an excerpt and answer.
Because as concerning many other things the majority of the earth human beings are not open for intellect and rationality, but rather only for confused belief in regard to deceit, lies, defamations and religious sectarian delusional belief-orientedness. Hence the real reality, well-founded knowledge and real truth can only against intellect and irrationally be perceived, as everything is neither considered nor perceived, comprehended and logically followed, but rather wrongly understood and thus cannot be logically followed. This itself also arises thus, as I always again must consistently recognize with my observations of the earth human beings, because warnings as well as explanations effectively are not perceived with interest and also are not registered, as also not understood, but rather as a rule, due to lacking considerations, will only be counter-based wrongly interpreted.
I can also sing a song of this, because many earthlings, who react in this wise, assume themselves are just as clever and smarter than that of the effective reality and its truth, whereby they want to give themselves as intelligent and also clever and smart, thereby however do not recognize they expose themselves as naive and of poor intelligence, and through their entire behavior and doings stage a show of their ridiculousness. Then I would like to now however speak of something else, which always again is brought to be addressed by various peoples, namely why you Plejaren since time immemorial hold back and since time immemorial have maintained absolutely no direct, but rather only indirect, and moreover only one-sided impulse-based contacts with earthlings, and also today will maintain no direct contacts, as also not in the future, as you held that since time immemorial also in regard to the earth foreign ones and to earth future ones. Also in this regard always again the question appears, why must I stand as an intermediary between the USA and you, in order to seek your imposition of an establishment of contact with the US government, which moreover had to run through the elders? Also if a contact would have come about indeed I would have furthermore needed to remain your intermediary, because contact-based you would have only acted in this wise. Indeed I know about the effective backgrounds, in which also the what was then sphere is integrated, which more as 52,000 years ago every 32 days circled around all the inhabited planets in your Plejaren system, after which all human beings became peaceful, but I think that you there too from your side could explain everything, in order to also create clarity regarding this.
That you can also explain, in particular in the realm of the core group and the passive group, because you recognize the facts good enough.
That I do that indeed, however it would be in my assessment better, if you would do that, for which I precisely have my reason.
You direct it today thereon, for me to suggestively and forcefully bring it about. Nevertheless good, then I want to satisfy your opinion and at the very least take up and reveal the facts. Firstly, however, I want to report to you about that, which you already have asked me a longer time ago, namely what it was with the Sanura lake and the dwarf Wesson. As you have said, I could find in my father's Fath's annals records about it, which also called attention to facts, which were completely strange and very interesting to me. In accordance with his annals he researched the earth at many times in the past, whereby he almost 40,000 years ago also encountered on the Sanura lake, in which the higher grounds above the today's centre were inhabited, at that time, by small, statured human beings, and were the far-off descendants of the first terrestrial hominids who showed the average height of 115 centimetres, approximately 27 inches. Together with these small-statured human beings, whose farthest descendants are partwise even today in Africa like the Pygmen, pygmies, as however also occurred in Asia. My father's Fath also researched their origin, which led him into many other areas of the earth, whereby he came across various other small groupings of small-statured ones in Europe, Africa, South and North America, in Australia and Asia. All these were however varied and exhibited up to 160 centimetres, approximately 63 inches. Height, were differently pigmented and showed anatomical differences. Interested, he continued to research the hominids in the past of the Earth's history and the Earth's humankind and comprehended the development processes that previously extended back until into the early times of 17 million years ago. Afterwards he even went back many further millions of years into the past and encountered the first life forms around 45 million years ago in the area which today is Germany, which itself developed into an early times form, from which the hominid developmental process emerged around 17 million years ago, and from which the small-statured human beings ultimately developed in the course of the further millions of years. He had discovered these life forms at the place where he was then also together with you, in order to teach you to instruct where the actual origin of the visibly becoming human life presence form began, in the area which you know as Messelpit, near Darmstadt. This first development of the life form, which led to the becoming of the first hominid species, my father's Fath for the very first time found there, where by then throughout many millions of years from which itself from the further developing descendants emerged in the area known today as North Africa, from which effectively came forth the first human life forms, as however at the same time also in areas that today are called Europe, South Africa, South and North America as well as Asia and Australia. Thus he fathomed that all the small-statured human beings researched by him earth-wide had arisen approximately at the same time, and these were the first and oldest human being, Wesson of the Earth, completely contrary to the in truth wrong research results of the today's terrestrial scientific anthropologists. Their supposed knowledge is only based on incorrect and hypothetical, i.e., invented claims. The myth was thus recognised through investigations into the past that the first ever effective human beings on the earth were small-statured ones who had originated in various areas in natural wise out of the planet and its nature, fauna and flora. Thus the origin of the earth's humankind found itself correctly in Africa, as the terrestrial anthropologists indeed correctly taught, however not in the wise as was thought up, because the story of the early terrestrial humankind began not at the time which was calculated in accordance with the finds of the earliest remains of the species Homo in Africa, but rather millions of years very much earlier. In accordance with the investigations of my father's faith, all past finds on the earth concerning earliest hominid correspond only to bones of human being Wesson, which themselves had evolution-based evolved from the first species Homo and thus from the small-statured ones and became of larger growth, hence from the dwarves, as you always called them, and on behalf of which you have set up various artificial dwarf figures diverse in the centre, which were effectively the very first earth-created human being, Wesson, which greater normal-growthed ones emerged, who in the today's present populate the world in a tremendous excess. Clearly it must now, however, also be explained that the hominid evolution of the human species has itself not uniformly taken place, but rather has taken place in manifold time and spatial gradations, like around 17 million years ago the process of the actual becoming and the evolutionary adaptation of Earth humanly phenotypic anatomy began in regard to the small-staturedness of the first life form Earth, human being. Concerning their body size, these were however normal-growing human beings and thus not comparable with the small-growing ones, i.e., lesser-growing ones in today's time on the Earth known as dwarfism. This small-staturedness arises due to symptoms of diverse underlying medical conditions, through which an impairment occurs in the body growth and with its limb development, whereby it is misunderstandingly assumed by inexperienced Earth human beings that these small-statured human beings are cognitively impaired. This, however, corresponds to an unparalleled confusion and wrong assessment, because these disadvantaged human beings through small staturedness are as a rule absolutely normal in regard to the development of consciousness, intellect, rationality and intelligence in the Ruth also all cognitive things, as also all physical capabilities in the Ruth also concerning reproduction and equal to the so-called normal growing ones. Consequently they therefore in this respect in no kind and wise lag behind the normal growing ones. What now, however, regarding the Sanura lake, as I explained to you already earlier, this thus covers the entire area of today's SCHMIDRTI, Sitzberg and BHL, i.e. the Pergabiatan was a very large lake. On the elevated shores, the grounds were inhabited, namely at a more elevated position over the point of view, where today the centre stands, where by you call the concerned terrains, House Kanzel and Pentiri Kanzel. This, whereas the today's centre is built up directly on the place, where at the time of the existence of the lake the shores were overgrown with phygmites.
Note Billy Framite sequels read.
As these plants grow still today in the riparian zones, on or near the banks, of waters, whereby you have encountered with excavations under the centre and near the shed, the old bank origin and also even found phygmites, read, remains from the what was then time. At another time, however, as my father once again visited the Sanura lake in the past around 29,800 years ago, he found this, the lake, no more. Consequently he fathomed what had occurred, whereby he was able to ascertain through further visits to the past, that through severe earthquakes the end of the dam backing up the Sanura lake was torn open in a way, and indeed below there, where today the inlet to the Steinental exists. And now to still explain is only that my father at that time, in accordance with his annals, themselves reflected the old teaching, which you newly drafted in the Canon 2031, verse 1102 have repeated. Consequently he around 29,800 years ago in the past time, assessed and found the area around the former Sanura lake to such an extent as ideal and as, hoof of the horse, that this must be the place of the wise one, as it is already described in the age-old OM. Thus he decided to arrange mediating at the level Arahatathar that one day, when he had to take over the task of your instruction, you on the one hand are supposed to be procreated and born through parents, who are supposed to have a direct connection in the area of the former lake, and on the other hand it is likewise supposed to be that also you are supposed to already be close to the entire realm around the former Sanura lake from the youngest youth on, in order to one day at this site build up a place, in order to spread from there for the entire earth world the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, and through the immeasurable assistance of the level Arahatathar, despite all the tremendous contrariness, my father's fast foretold noble request has itself been realized, and thus in fact the actual centre exists today and works out into the entire world. These, Edward, my dear friend, are the facts from my father's unendingly many records of his annals, which I did not become understanding of until the last days, and now it can also be told to you.
Incredible. Also, I knew nothing of all these things and events, but rather I had only the little information which Sfath had to necessarily give to me. Therewith I knew what I was and what I had to do.
Thus, in fact, was my father, because he always only explained so much as was necessary. We should not talk about that now, but rather about that which concerns us Plejaren. I must begin the with, while I address that which itself had come about around 52,000 years ago on Eria and other Plejaren planets. At that time swinging waves were exuded from out of the spherical flying object that circled around Eria and also around the other Plejaren planets every 32 days, which with all planetary inhabitants took under control a distinct brain region and a precisely defined realm, against which there was no possible defence, as could be fathomed by what was then scientists, for which itself with the processes, and around whatever brain areas and precise realm of the brain it acted itself, our directives do not allow me to explain, because through more precise disclosures for the Earth human beings, i.e., their brain, researchers therefrom cognitions can be gained, which then, as usual with the Earth scientists, when they gain new cognitions, new useful weapons for wars and intelligence agencies would abuse and change these then for murder, destruction, torture and for wartime purposes. This would reveal itself on the one hand among the neuroscientists, who would use this in the wise in order to manipulate the structure and mode of function of the nervous systems of the Earth human beings to such an extent that these would become destroyed and incapable of functioning. Even entire peoples would thereby be eradicated or simply suffering and made ill, as, e.g., through a widespreading and radiation of illness causing swinging waves with the concerned Earth human beings, who are supposed to be eradicated or tormented. Polyneuropathy and migraine, as however also neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's disease, autoimmunological illnesses like multiple sclerosis, as also traumatic brain injury, strokes, cerebral hemorrhages, epilepsy, brain tumours and meningitis, etc., can equally be brought about, whereby there would be no more possibilities of treatment and therapy alternatives given against everything. Furthermore, regarding this also consciousness illnesses such as insanities, idiotism and imbecility, etc., would be taken into account, as also unhealable depressions and psychical destructions, etc.
That would be more than merely unhuman. However, it would certainly be appropriate to explain what has itself happened with ye Plejaren more than 52,000 years ago, that is, how and in what way your peoples of all the Plejaren planets achieved the peace and the freedom.
However, that could in fact Ausartungen get very badly out of control of the good human nature, in the wise, as you have said, which is why I may consider no further disclosures and explanations and may explain nothing more precisely. I may however explain, which I, however, want to do only in brief ways and without greater explanations, what has itself happened with their forebears 52,000 years ago, in which case I however really do not think of to be detailed. It came about itself, that the swinging wave impulses radiated by the mentioned spherical flying device very effectively influenced distinct areas of the brain of all planetary inhabitants and to such an extent acted on special realms, which assuaged all impulsations of guilt and Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, however were not extinguished, but rather were only shifted into a moderated state and peacefully attuned. This was enough, that the populations of all planets within that time, during which the spherical flying device circled around the worlds, were set free from all malicious guilt and were of a more peaceful mood, however nevertheless included their free will and above all without outside verbal influences by the country leaders and their unpeaceful propaganda, etc. All was more connected to the intellect and rationality and autonomously began to think, consider, to determine and to act. The calming swinging wave influences, which only worked on distinct areas of the brain and in those only in special realms, were neither aggressive nor coercing, because only swinging wave impulses occurred, through which intellect and rationality became stimulated and led thereto, that the populations cast aside their collective thought world within fewer days, because they became free of all unpeaceful suggestive collective thinking steered through the governments and religions and were each able to form one's own autonomous thoughts and opinions. Through the very quick casting aside of their collective thinking suggestively steered through the governments and the religions and the likewise very quick learning and learned the benefit of the one's own individual thoughts and the human beings of the Plejaren planets perceived, comprehended and logically followed their personal self-cognition and themselves formed their own and always greater becoming self-determination, whereby they obtained a personal mental strength. In more special wise the Ruth worked the setting free and abandoning of all religious belief factors, and the Ruth grew the perception and cognition of the reality, and by therein established truth, and the Ruth the comprehension, understanding and following of the natural creational law principles which universally are focused on peacefulness, freedom and autonomy. Once this was recognized by all Plejaren populations of all our worlds, and every religious belief was cast aside and became taboo, manifold cognitions were formed, and therefrom led to the outcoming of personal attitudes and extensive thought processes and certainties, which thereto led, that all human beings of all peoples learned to position themselves to autonomously, suggestively and forcefully bring about culmination points, and to also adhere to these under difficulties, to work out failures better and good, themselves work out of a higher motivation, and to achieve their set self-realization culmination points. Also it revealed that within only 11 days they divert themselves less and less by other people's opinions, and above all also not through the suggestive unpeaceful government whisperings, nor let themselves fall back to the lack of peace. Contrarily, all populations of all planets henceforth brought themselves all together in all required efforts and to the perseverance in the fulfillment achievement of their culmination points. They very quickly became conscious of their own capabilities and learned equally fast to control and to masterizing situations of every kind, and quickly became mentally strong persons who also learned to use their capabilities by having to always again seek, find and also themselves bring to fruition new challenges for their intellect and their rationality, as well as for their self-development and self-realization. Thereby the individual human beings learned within a very brief time to master the burdens and stress and to live their entire self-created personality characteristics in a controlled manner. Through their continuously growing mental strength they created very quickly a consciousness-based capability, which itself also strongly had an effect on their psychical and physical health, as also thereon, that they themselves always set new, challenging culmination points and brought these to fruition. And all that, together with many other positive developments, ultimately within only 32 days led to it, during which the spherical flying device circled around the worlds, that all persons of all populations ultimately autonomously and according to the one's own free will broke loose from all Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, and from every guilt and immoral thing, etc., through the inconceivably strong, evolutively working swinging wave impulses which were radiated by the spherical flying object and influenced the humankind of all our Plejaren planets. Within a very short time all human beings became conscious that outside influences directed on them through other persons, powers and populist and unpeaceful by the government steered peace hostile, Ausartungen, badly out of the control of the good human nature, guilt-causing and destructive, as well as intellect and rationality disadvantaging negative and malicious influences occurred and negatively influenced them against their own will, and they fell prey to their guilt, etc. This cognition led to it, that the human beings of all of our planets rejected the guilt, the unmorality, the Ausartungen, things that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, the evil things and bad things, and also overcame their bad habits. It was however also recognized that despite all cognitions and strivings concerning the life conduct in the good things, right things, humanly things, and in regard to the righteousness, as also concerning the following of the natural positive creational law principles, the human beings always remain susceptible and can again fall back into old ungood, negative, evil and bad behaviours, if he/she does not make an effort around the necessary controls for the prevention. And it was recognised that this can always then again occur when regarding this in any verbal, physical or consciousness burdening, thought burdening, feeling burdening and psyche burdening forms influence long enough on the human beings from the outside. Thus regarding this all human beings of all Plejaren planets, i.e. their populations were to such an extent subject to this natural creational law of effect, that countermeasures must be embraced, that the directives will be adhered to and followed, and that therein exists, that no direct or otherwise damage bringing connections to foreign worlds and their populations could be sought and maintained, in order to not again fall back into the old behaviours of our forebears through such a kind of contacts with foreign peoples who are not equally directed peoples. We Plejaren of today are also human beings, like our forebears of 52,000 years ago and all former descendants since that time, that we must resist when without prejudice these kind of outside influences, because unfortunately we are still always susceptible to negative outside influences, which would cause us to fall back into the old behaviours, if we were to be in, for us, detrimental negative realms of influence long enough, and we would be met by negatively influencing factors on us. We Plejaren are also human beings and therein subject to develop ourselves within the framework of every natural creational regulation and law principle, and indeed through very arduous working out of our higher consciousness evolution, which we also after 52,000 years of peace must follow and always furthermore learn. And we can do this today through the teaching of life from Nicodemean, the teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, which unspeakably much helps us with our further consciousness evolution, which was known to us however only in small parts until the beginning of your mission, which you now however in frequently extended explanations not only bring and teach the earth human beings, but rather also us. However, what concerns our forebears of more than 52,000 years ago, thus they obtained their cognitions not until at that time and firstly became conscious of the effective facts and values of the life conduct in accordance with the natural creational law principles, when the spherical flying objects appeared and circled around our Plejaren planets, whereby all Plejaren populations were struck by its swinging wave impulses and in a subdued, however distinct and effective wise were calmed and peacefully attuned. Their intellect and their rationality were stimulatingly influenced by these swinging wave impulses, whereby the populations turned themselves to the gentle, urgent, peaceful impulses and consciously dedicated themselves to learning their consciousness evolution. Through this devotion, our what was then forebearers recognized the truth and effectiveness of the natural creational law principles and the right natural creational conditioned mode of life. They learned to fathom and to follow and made them their own, whereby henceforth all populations consciously developed according to this and in every wise thereon focused themselves. The entirety, however, they were not able to do until after they recognized that their entire, very high technical development in all forms and possibilities in regard to peace, real freedom, righteousness, fairness, of intellect plus rationality plus logic, and humanness as well as a life conduct according to natural creational law principles not dissuaded by their Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, their guilt, behaviour and by all the evil things, by anything leading to war and all the destructive things and all the negative things and all evil behaviours. Not until through the influencing of the swinging wave impulses on them, which radiated from the spherical flying device and influenced by those they were peacefully attuned, did they thus find the personal developmental change and ultimately achieved through their own consciousness, evolution, cognitions, strivings, their own will, their intellect, their rationality and use of their intelligence for their personal inner peace, for personal inner freedom and righteousness. And this invaluable gain and victory over themselves began to outwardly bring it also to fruition, whereby also all peoples among each other connected themselves in continuing conditions of peace and freedom, and since that time also all acts of guilt, Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, and wars, etc., belong to the past, as in fact must thereto however be repeated, that all acts of guilt, wars, all hatred and all falsehood, all strife, all unfreedom and unrighteousness, as well as all injustices and Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, etc., in any forms could only to be ceased, as the swinging wave impulses of the spherical flying device influenced all Plejaren peoples and calmingly and peacefully attuned them, where by their own autonomous incapability of thinking, uninfluenced from the outside, as well as their intellect, their rationality and the use of their intelligence became consciously mighty, and thereby their own self-development could take place. That, however, does not mean at that time that our forebearers of 52,000 years ago or since that time were formerly elevated over every susceptibility and relapse into the old Ausartungen, very badly out of control of the good human nature, malicious, warlike, acts of guilt in all other negative forms and all natural creational law principles ignoring and values. And that is also not so at the present time, because we Plejaren of today also are still not immune to it, as also all our forebearers were equally not. That is extensively well known by us Plejaren, and we know also through the teaching of No Terrestrial that, in order to be elevated over all susceptibility and relapse into the old negative models of Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, acts of guilt, wars, hatred, falseness and maliciousness, etc. It requires with the human beings very much more than only the developmental change to peace, to freedom, fairness, of intellect plus rationality plus logic, and righteousness, etc., and that it is all not simply worked out through normal development in regard to intellect, rationality, intelligence and knowledge. This is, however, very much more not possible for a human being, no matter who, how, what and from where he/she is, whether from the earth, from our Plejaren planets or otherwise elsewhere, until then, when very thoroughly and intensively throughout all times one learns to perceive reality and its therein contained truth in all therefrom resulting cognitions for implementing the all of your self-development and correct positive and evolutive wise, and the all-embracing cognition which step by step ripened in all human beings of our Plejaren populations, also led to the awareness of the fact that all becoming of all natural creational prosperousness requires a long space of time, which regarding this with all Plejaren peoples led to the cognition and to the understanding of it, that they would never finish learning, but rather their entire life they must learn and always furthermore would have to learn, because the learning never comes to an end, but rather endlessly and also will progress in each new life in regard to each new personality. Thus it became clear and comprehensible that the learning/study never ends and thus must always be continued in each new life of each new personality, and indeed over many thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years away, up until the one-day entrance into the higher levels of the High Council and more higher. However, that also means, and that was recognized in the course of time, that the human being throughout all times, that he/she always again incarnates as new personalities and exists and lives as material life forms, must endlessly learn and always furthermore learn, which is why he/she as a learning human being also never will be immune, and over will commit errors, in order to learn from these and to understand everything better and to continue the positive learning. Therewith, however, also the cognition was connected, that due to the currently lifelong learning process of every new personality also was given the connected danger and possibility and timelessly over all new incarnations and new personalities, again, despite every achieved higher development, to fall back into old behaviours of previous personalities. However, it was recognized that entirely especially suggestive verbal, thought and feeling conditioned influences, as also consciousness and psyche disturbances as well as manifold action conditioned outside influences of fellow human beings can bring about and cause very negative relapses in regard to behaviours of every kind. And this cognition, that such outside influences from fellow human beings suggestively work in redounding, relapsing, into old, negative modes of action and provoke and bring about patterns in a suggestive and forceful way and let ultimately break through, led thereto, that directives were drawn up, which warned and prohibited, that from then on in no kind and wise will more outside planetary contacts and connections with peoples or individual life forms be allowed to become maintained, was lowering their life and behaviour-based evolutionary level as well as rationality of their consciousness, thought, feeling, psyche, action and rationality than that relating to the general average Plejaren population. And these directives have themselves been preserved throughout all times up until into the today's present, and thus moreover and also up until in the far-off future will preserve their validity. This for this reason, because we have known for 52,000 years through the teaching of No Terrestrial, which you impart to our humankind as also the Earth's humankind, that through various outside suggestive or any other negative influences the susceptibility is always given in regard to redounding, relapsing, into old, negative patterns and norms with all human beings in universal vastness. Hence also we Plejaren can be disadvantaged through such energies and powers influencing on us and can fall back into old behaviours. However, on the other hand we have to protect ourselves, whereby we react regarding this in accordance with our directives, this unswervingly fulfilling consideration and following, and thus run no danger to sustain any harm. Through the teaching by No Terrestrial, which you impart to us, we know now also that the human being is to such an extent long susceptible to setbacks and redounding, relapsing into old, negative forms of old behaviours, until he/she no longer requires his or her material body, which will not be until then, when his or her spirit form enters into the higher level of the High Council. Not until then has the consciousness of the human being also reached a higher evolution step, and can then also therefrom benefit and beneficially perceive, use and effectively implement in the consciousness the always positive impulses from the spirit form. If that however were not the case, then always remains the possibility of the danger in regard to the susceptibility and relapsing into old negative mentality and behaviours, etc. Which is why everlastingly in contrast must be thought and everything consciously controlled. Therewith the falling back into the old Ausartungen, very badly out of control of the good human nature, patterns are avoided. And this danger of relapse always exists in every case and with every human being, when he/she is suggestively influenced from the outside in his or her consciousness, his or her intellect, his or her rationality and intelligence, etc. And when his or her spirit form is also not yet evolved in sufficiently high framework. This however is also given in this wise with us Plejaren, because our consciousness and intellect, our rationality and intelligence, due to a deficiency of a sufficiently high consciousness evolution, are still susceptible to Ausartungen, badly out of the control of the good human nature, outside influences of every possible kind, whereby in particular verbal and action conditioned influences from the outside and are directed on our behaviours by human beings, affecting us to such an extent that they can be working on us negatively and throw us back into the old Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, and outcoming effects, which with their forebears of 52,000 years ago was still their own, and from which we also at the present time and still very far into the future must protect ourselves. Therewith, i.e., in this regard even a very highly developed technology of every kind cannot protect us, hence we can only otherwise many manifold use these for ourselves. Whereas we however in regard to our evolution, mentality and all our behaviours in every wise are dependent on our intellect, our rationality, intelligence and directives, in order to preserve and not endanger these, and by our forebears and ourselves to constantly furthermore work out high life values of every kind and wise. And this corresponds to a matter which indeed to the majority of the earth's humankind may appear incomprehensible, as also that we from out of these justifications cannot and may not involve ourselves in any direct or alternative contacts and connections with differently thinking and differently living life forms, i.e., also human beings like the earth human. This fact is thus one of the most important reasons for it, that we Plejaren hold ourselves back in accordance with our security and our created directives regarding this may not enter into contacts in more direct or more telepathic, as however also not in any technical communicative form with persons and peoples of other worlds. This, even then, when they, in their forms of mentality and behaviours as well as in their kind of life as well as in regard to their use of intellect, rationality and intelligence, etc., are not equally directed to Plejaren values, but rather contrarily Ausartungen, very badly gotten out of control of the good human nature, and with acts of guilt as well as wantonly, criminally, inadequate in regard to righteousness and the following of the natural creational law principles, etc., as that is very distinctly the case with the earth's humankind, with which only very few excluded ones are to be found, who, when also not amply, but at the very least partially, themselves learning to make an effort around a better, positive and natural creationally correct life conduct. The negative factors mentioned, like those that arise with the earth human beings and thus naturally also with the third grouping, as these Ausartungen, something that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature. Factors are also given with the earth foreign ones and with the earth future ones. In addition, arise with the earth foreign ones and the third grouping and with two earth future ones, who on the one hand already since thousands of years or since other considerable time on the earth, always again in various wise call attention to their presence. These explanations should suffice, because they with I have clarified the important facts.
That has all already been explained to me by your father's Fath, as also you, your daughter Semyaz, Quetzal and Asket, but I thought that the entirety should still be explained openly by you in a conversation, which you indeed now have done. Very dear thanks for that, Pata. Your explanation surely helps many earthlings to understand why you strictly held back that you, for example, also cannot in direct wise get involved in any connections with the terrestrial government, but rather only through my being intermediary. And why the entirety in regard to the attempt to produce an indirect establishment of contact with the U.S. government through me also could not come about in this wise, which you had indeed also clarified and determined, that namely by Odairus's Odairisness was run through an unfair business, that had put you off and led to the cognition that an honest contact attempt with the earthlings is impossible. Already your first contact attempt with the terrestrial government, precisely with the USA, was indeed thought through my intervention and was supposed to be accomplished through a person tasked by me, whereby however everything was unfortunately condemned to failing from the beginning through lying and deception. Thus also in this respect was and is to be said, that honesty cannot, through lying and deception, lead to a success, but rather precisely only through effective honesty itself, that only seen from natural creational perspective can lead to something valueful and permanent. Also regarding this reality and truth are fundamental values of everything, whereby however many earthlings attempt to manipulate the reality and its truth depending upon desire and mood, or to form their own benefit and advantage, whereby often much is made impossible and destroyed. Reality and truth can however on the one hand not be separated, because they form in oneness, and on the other hand it is not comprehended, what reality and truth really mean, which is why I also still in our conversation for once would like to express what is to be understood by this. I find this is necessary, because since time immemorial by many philosophers, like, for example, Aristotle, Democritus, Friedrich Nietzsche, René Descartes, Confucius, Peter Abelard, Francis Bacon, Kant and Hegel and many other wise ones, who never really defined the concept of truth, but rather only embarrassing with senseless attempts at explanation was made all the more incomprehensible, and also still today misleadingly and without understanding is made with senseless attempts at explanation. That occurs also in many other kinds and wises, like, for example, in the dialectic materialism, in the American pragmatism and in the subjective idealism, in the consensus theory, through the pragmatic truth and the coherence theory of the truth, etc., whereby it is also differentiated between a predicative and attributive concept of truth, etc. Thus I think that I give for once a clear explanation, what you pleasure and comprehend about the term truth, precisely thus, as I have learned it from your father's Fath's instruction, which I hope I can still correctly repeat it, how he has taught it to me, and correspondingly the term truth can fundamentally only to such an extent be defined, that is comprehensible, which is to be understood under the value Wahrheit, truth.
Truth is well founded in the perception and cognition of reality, and thus in the reflection of the same, because the truth is established in reality, which on its own is reality. True actuality corresponds to an absolute concordance in logic, that is, logicalness, and proves the authenticity, realness, purity and rightness of real reality, which as such has no possibility of doubt, and indeed in every respect correlates in regard to an effective real, true situation, that is, irrefutable facts of a taken place, existing, made, present or future occurring assertion, claim, a being existent, a circumstance, an event, a deed, speech, impulsation, situation, matter, action, a presence, occurrence or a behavior, etc.
My presentation was itself not considered extensive, because if I needed to explain everything more detailed, then today the time for it would not have been enough. And regarding your explanation concerning the term truth, thereto I must say that you were an unusually good student of my father, and your recollection does not leave anything to desire, as sometimes you say with certain opportunities.
It indeed was also not necessary, and indeed also not needed, because what you have explained is completely sufficient and calls attention to what was at that time, how it came to the peace with your peoples, and which is why you Plejaren you in every wise hold back from contacts with earthlings, earth foreign ones and earth future ones. And there too I think that you in accordance with your directives also hold back with others and not planet peoples belonging to your federation, who cannot be integrated into your development and behavior schema, etc. More to explain me from my perspective regarding this thus is not necessary. Thanks for your endeavor.
What you think and say, that actually corresponds to our directive cadences and to our behavior.
What you however say in regard to my memory capability, generally is not so, because after my health collapse and my partial amnesia I have forgotten much from my personal life history and not again renewed. What was important for me, which refers itself fundamentally only to my mission work, which is why I only all that regarding this necessary knowledge have again worked on, which has alone already cost me very much in terms of striving. If I however would also still have needed to knock my life history again into shape, then I would have badly failed, because everything would have been too much and I today could no longer fulfill my work. What however regarding your shortened explanations, thus it was indeed also not necessary and indeed also not needed, to say more, because what you have explained is completely sufficient and calls attention to that which at that time was, how it came to peace with your peoples, and which is why you Plejaren you in every wise hold back from contacts with earthlings, earth foreign ones and earth future ones. And there too I think that you in accordance with your directives also hold back with others and not planet peoples belonging to your federation, who cannot be integrated into your development and behavior schema, etc. More to explain me from my perspective regarding this thus is not necessary. Thanks for your endeavor. What however surely would be necessary to explain, which might be that, why the Earth's humankind lives in Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature of ghoul, murder and manslaughter, torture, coercion, wars, revolutions, terrorism, rapes, destructions and with lies, deceit, hatred, strife, unfreedom, injustice, unrighteousness and calumnies, etc., and so forth. The entire regarding this is indeed fundamentally not only a matter of the Ausartungen, something that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, individual earthlings, and also not only the case, in regard to the absolute majority explained with the human beings of the earth, but rather in reality with 99.6% of the entire earth population, as your father, Svath already said to me after the end of the World War, as he explained to me the cause of the entire evil of the human beings of the earth, which indeed is not innately normal natural creational, but rather became created by the human beings and since time immemorial genetically endlessly transmitted, handed down, that is, from generation to generation and also into all future generations, continues to become. And this is now unfortunately even thus, that precisely the human beings, and therewith I now mean particularly the earthling, were now to very badly get out of control of the good human nature, as I have learned from Svath and you, that through their own doing become Ausartungen, very badly out of control of the good human nature. Thereby it must be clear, that out there in the expanses of the universe are also still other humankind and life forms, which are equally ill in the head, and unpeacefully and unrighteously live with Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature of all kinds, and therefore likewise through their one's own doing, in similar to or same wise as the earthlings, make a hell of their life presence, existence. And as Svath already said, what thereby can be said about it, that the absolute majority of all human and human-like created creations in our entire universe have thus through one's own early Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, fallen into a converging state with that of the Ausartungen, very badly gotten out of control of the good human nature, Earth's humankind. That however can one day lead to enormous unpleasantnesses, and even to acts of war with extraterrestrials, and to the danger of the extinction or enslavement of the Earth's humankind, as also to annexing the Earth by Earth foreign ones. And precisely in this regard that crazy earthlings, who do not possess a sense of intellect, rationality and intelligence, have done everything with the SETI project, therewith it possibly can occur, when the SETI probe is found by Earth foreign ones. Through this delusional project, extraterrestrials are supposed to be made attentive of the Earth, and with it contact is supposed to be sought, and one has it entire there within itself. However, all this is actually only an incidental remark, because I indeed wanted to explain that, which Svath has taught me in regard to the evil, from which the 99.6% of the earthlings since time immemorial are dominated based on heredity, thereby catastrophe after catastrophe and terribleness after terribleness are brought about, and slowly through their delusion of the continuously growing overpopulation, which furthermore is growing, destroys the entire nature, its fauna and flora, and also the planet. And to all the Ausartungen ones who have badly got out of the control of the good human nature, who dominated the earthling, that is, the human beings of the earth, Svath explained to me that this evil has itself been reflected before old time as Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, genetic in the human beings, and indeed through his or her own guilt. Wherein the whole, thus I have learnt from your father, various factors play a very important role in regard to the coming about of the Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature and the human beings, whereby however the human being is not simply helplessly at the mercy of these factors, but rather she brings it under control through intellect, rationality, intelligence, and according to free choosing and controls, and can lead his or her life in peace, freedom, love, righteousness, equalizedness, helpfulness, and behaviors aligned according to natural creational law principles. Thus she is not coerced to do something Ausartungen very badly gotten out of control of the good human nature, that is, evil, because fundamentally she can determine him/herself through intellect, rationality, intelligence, and one's own will, etc., how and whether she something and what she wants to do or to not to do, and indeed both in the good and in the evil things, i.e., in the negative and positive things. Precisely this fact, however, the earthling takes on no cognizance due to lack of interest and too lazy to think. Consequently, she also in no kind and wise makes an effort, in order to make something useful of him/herself, precisely a human being, which effectively is humanness, that is, truly being a human being in the real and true sense. All goodness, love, right, valueful and every right behavior can easily ascertainably and comprehensibly be explained, in accordance with natural creational regulation and law principle. However, every word of every explanation goes unheard like even a hardly audible breath of wind in the desert. The human being's time immemorial genetic burden in regard to the Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, unhuman, lacking goodness, evil, with acts of ghoul, murderous, killing, overpopulation creating, raping, torturing, lying/untruthful, cheating and slanderous, as also the warlike, terroristic, falsehoods, and all around the earthling became a destroying one to such an extent characteristic and obvious, that she therein wallows and is there with content. where and what is however hidden as a secret behind everything, namely how and where everything arises in the brain, which the human beings equally do not care, like what lets everything Ausartungen, something that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, arise in the good, as in the evil, that is, in the negative and positive in all manifold forms. Thus the human being does not interest him/herself about it, that everything each depending upon kind comes forth as the finest and harmless breath of an idea and therefrom developing thoughts from the consciousness, whereby the actual origin is well founded in the frontal lobe of the brain, like however in the so-called paired central area of the brain, that is, in the media part of the respective temporal lobes, where the stimulus response center stands, in which through the feelings developing from thoughts of good or evil, that is, negative or positive will create emotional effects. And this occurs through thought-feeling influences, which are brought about through environmental circumstances and various outside influences, fellow human beings and their machinations and other influences, etc., as however also through the blood sugar content of the human beings, in an important wise influences and really directs the function of the stimulus response center. The truth regarding this is namely that the higher the blood sugar value is, the more the human being is connected to the peace, the love, equalizedness, righteousness and the altruism, as she also is more consciously connected to the freedom and fairness of intellect plus rationality plus logic circumvent and is therewith connected to, contrary to that in the other case, precisely when the human being's in the clutch of his or her Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, life and this willingly or unwillingly logically follows through his or her evil and negative behaviors, shows a deeply below average blood sugar content. That however has nothing to do with it. Thus Foth taught me that the human being can increase his or her blood sugar content through large oral sugar inclusion or through sugar injections directly into the blood and as a result becomes better, more peaceful and more selfless, because in accordance with the explanation of Foth a distinct substance in the blood sugar is the decisive factor, which ensures the corresponding reaction in the stimulus response center. The designation of the substance I no longer know, but this might also not indeed be particularly important, whereas however precisely the fact, as Foth said, that this blood sugar substance is influenced by the thoughts and feelings and brings about the corresponding important reaction in the stimulus response center. Also it means that the human beings, even when she eats many sweets and therewith wants to let his or her blood sugars rise high, however lives without good, willful, positive, loving, peaceful and free impulsations in regard to his or her thoughts and to therefrom coming out feelings. The corresponding blood sugar substance cannot be created and the missing substance regarding this can neither be created nor used by the stimulus response center. However, furthermore is also to be said, that the thoughts and feelings create the actual neurophysiological reactions in the brain, whereby fundamentally the truth is that this can take place only in the stimulus response center, although the human being, however, can influence this center only with great difficulty. When she nevertheless wants to influence it and bring it under his or her conscious control, then she must in every way be master of his or herself and over all his or her impulsations, and therewith also become the true human being, which required however not only many years of intensive, serious and painful study as well as abstinences and often enduring malicious hardship. The entirety requires a decades-long deprivational learning and developmental process, through which everything must be regulated, which since the earliest primeval times in the human beings in Ausartungen, something very badly got out of control of the good human nature, formed and gene conditioned up to the present day has been handed down and also will continue to be inherited into the distant future. Effectively the Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, are established in every individual human being of the earth. Hence everyone is burdened with the inheritance of a profound intrusion, which corresponds to an original degenerative development, through which unconscious reminding, flashbacks, and re-experiencing of psychotraumatic events, and therewith precisely the Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature of all kinds created in primeval times, drilling or superficial driven. Most recently, however, comes about effective active outwardly breaking out in various wises, be it verbal or through indirectly or directly in accordance with forms of Ausartung, something that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, corresponding to negative or positive equilibrating behaviors. Now I am again somewhat deviated from that, which must still be said in regard to the stimulus response center, because this works, in accordance with the explanations of Sfath, with the erroneous impulses, which emanate from the frontal lobe, whereby the stimulus response not only increases itself, but rather therewith constantly also its energy and its power, which expresses itself in the human beings negatively or positively, because indeed fundamentally and from nature there are both factors. Thereby it comes then only thereunto, that the human beings utilize these two energies and powers, precisely whether in positive or negative wise, whereby however as a rule the negatives predominates and simply turns loose and lets the breakthrough become, because, as the old proverb says however, the way of the least resistance is the easiest and thus chosen and pursued. Consequently the thoughts and the therefrom resulting feelings in no kind and wise controls developing and breaking forth from the consciousness, but rather simply itself continuously increasing wildly let go, until it becomes the enormous might and ultimately, negatively or positively, comes to the outbreak. In negative wise it then occurs, and the negatives indeed are prominent since time immemorial which do not become superior reactions of joy, love, peace, the fairness of intellect plus rationality plus logic and righteousness, but rather anxiety, hatred, pathological craving for revenge, strife, injustice and unfreedom, ghoul, compulsion and no more tameable anger. That leads then ultimately entirely to the outbreak and to the carrying out of malicious and uncontrollable Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, and indeed up to the misanthropy, which corresponds to a view and a mode of action of human beings, who hate the human beings, who become the murderer, manslayer or mass murderer, or at the very least rejects their nearness. Such a human being becomes possibly the misanthrope, that is, a human being hater and misanthropist, whereby for those, no thought-feeling based impulsations exist any longer for the fellow human beings, hence conscienceless and uncontrolled are also presented in this kind, like it occurs in terrible wise with torturing, rape, mass murder and entirely especially in wars, in which the human beings particularly act out their Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature. However, to the misanthrope, the altruist stands in contradiction, who is a philanthropist and more of a selfless, unselfish human being, who him/herself to a large extent is able to keep free of his or her, since time immemorial, inherited Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature through control, self-discipline and humanness, which however in every case are always conditioned only by time and situation. This thus, because namely everyone also him/herself are mentality-based altruistically trained, built up and competent human beings despite all altruistic striving and control in regard to him/herself, his or her impulsations, his/her thoughts and feelings as well as his or her behaviors remain vulnerable to his or her inherited Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, which can unexpectedly breach through any nasty inner or expressed actions and circumstances, whereby, as I mentioned, principally already always the disastrous, fatal, pernicious, devastating, abominable, ungracious, evil, precarious, malice and bad, the negatives and even writing, destructive, and I won't say the Mephistopheles, stands in the foreground. And that then as a rule the evil comes to the expression and outbreak, which is with the human beings very special than the case shows, when he/she special physical characteristics, as, for example, a reduced function of the autonomous nervous system. This is namely responsible for the regulation of the heartbeat, as also for the respiration, the blood pressure, digesting, the metabolism, the sexual organs and perspiration, as well as the eye musculature, whereby the thoughts and the therefrom resulting feelings and those through these influenced psyche wields thereon a very important function, which becomes especially more recognizable and more perceptible with vexation, anxiety, fear, hatred, lack of peace and anger. When the autonomous nervous system is disadvantaged, then it works that out itself in extreme wise, in particular on the heartbeats of the human beings, and also on his or her blood pressure, and therewith also on his or her Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature. And indeed it is thus, because, when the heartbeat has a slowdown function, and hence also the blood pressure balanced on low value, and impulsion to the activity arises, without the way to the compulsion, that is, activism as a rule leads to the nearest way of least resistance, precisely over the hidden works which push the Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, into the foreground and let them break out. When then actually faced with this circumstance, then the entire nervous system is overloaded, and that leads to the explosion, that is, then would reach the Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, predominating deeply inside, squeezing outwardly, come to the outbreak and to very badly getting out of control of the good human nature, and indeed, due to the time immemorial heredity of the Ausartungen, things that have very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, dash in a malicious, rioting verbalism, or in physical deeds in regard to ghoul, murder and manslaughter, torture, rape and terror, as well as all kinds of unhuman behaviors. Fundamentally thus is to be said, because I must again explain it somewhat more precisely, that the frontal lobe and the stimulus response center are fundamental origin factors in the brain of the human beings, in which everything begins to act out. Firstly occurs the entirety of every Ausartung thing that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, as inconspicuous ideaing therefrom resulting thoughts, from which itself then depending upon the personal impulsations, perceptions, fantasies and wishes, etc., manifest words or deeds in accordance with the one's own will, precisely each formed in good or evil, that is, more negative or more positive kind and wise. The entirety initially develops itself, however, in a hidden, still unknown to the human being, somehow secrete, unofficial, and I would like say sterile form, as well as in a more impersonal kind and wise. Hence everything to such an extent takes place, as if it acts itself not around something that the concerned human being concerns him/herself with. Differently explained, I want to therewith say that she initially does not recognize the entirety as his or her very own product, and thus also does not accept it as such, but rather, when she becomes conscious of it, sees it as a machination of the events and situations, and as product and result of the machinations of the fellow human beings and environment. Thereby, however, she loses his or her autonomy and connects him/herself with the fellow human beings in the society, as also with all their machinations, be it in regard to views, hypotheses, impulsations of all kinds, like hatred, lies, ghoul, torture, calumnies, words, deeds, as well as all other behaviors. That means that the human being in this way no longer sees him/herself, but rather only as a dependent part of the mass, hence thus as an acting part of the society. The humankind are of a grouping, their rules, laws, regulations, etc., and their therefrom resulting behaviors which in every wise become his/her own. Consequently thereby his or her entirely own individuality is extinguished, and she is conscienceless, weak-willed and irresponsible for the tool thereof, which suggestively influences him/her from the outside in better, worse, positive or negative wise, be it from the society, from individual fellow human beings, a group, the society or the entire humankind, like also through forms of bondage, politics or religious and sectarian belief delusion, military machinations, terrorism, philosophy or sciences, etc., all of which trigger stimulus responses in the human beings. Thus the frontal lobe and the stimulus response center are fundamental origin factors in the brain of the human beings, in which everything begins to act out.
To your remarks and your explanations, indeed nothing else is to be discussed, because concerning all that which my Father has taught you, which you moreover learned in what you have explained, should suffice. However, you have mentioned the term Mephistophel, which is not known to me despite cognizance of your native language and also the German language. Hence I think that this word acts itself around one which you have created, as you indeed created also new alternative words and terms time and time again. Mephistopheles, i.e. Mephisto is well known to me as name of or one of evil in the first substance, which is why I assume that you refer yourself with your new term to the fiendishness.
Yes, however also it is indeed not too difficult to guess. With fist however it acts itself thereby around a subservient spirit, in order to call up initiative, or as paredros, that is, observers in spirit family, that is, good house spirits or confidant of the family, who here became considered magical, and which esteemed or considered became referred to after the fist as the personified conscience.
You are supposed to call the frontal lobe with the today's terrestrial technical term.
How that is referred to, that I unfortunately do not know.
The term is prefrontal cortex.
Thanks. However, I think to all that, which I have explained, that only fewer things really have an interest and thus will make extensive thoughts about it, like it thus was since time immemorial and also still thus will remain.